Hello everyone, my name is Josh and this is Whimsical and Interesting Musings. And today I'm very excited. We're going to be talking about two particular projects that are currently getting their own spin-offs at the moment on television, and one of them is The Lord of the Rings. And I am so happy to be talking about this because I friggin' love the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I love it to death. I think it's a fantastic film trilogy. And it's a film trilogy that a lot of us grew up with. I mean, it's one of those particular trilogies that I owned at one point, both the theatrical cut and the extended cuts, all in equal measure. Like when you get two or when you get one, you've got to get them all. I first started with the Two Towers. I think no, was it the Two Towers? No, it was Return of the King that we got first as a family, and when we got Return of the King, we had to get the Two Towers and Fellowship of the Ring afterwards. But I want to talk about each and every single film separately so we get the chance to actually kind of get to know these characters and get to know these storylines. So the first film in the trilogy is called The Fellowship of the Ring, and it basically builds up the mythology behind Middle Earth, and it pretty much sets up the main bulk of the storyline, which is that the Lady Galadriel, played by Cate Blanchett, who is amazing in this film, by the way. Anything that she's in, she's pretty much amazing in, because she's such a good actress and she can portray characters with a lot of range and a lot of character. And as Lady Galadriel, she's probably one of the most memorable because of how she performs this character who has a very ethereal presence, a character who has been around for thousands of years. She's the wisest of all elven women, and she is a character who has a bit of a dark side too. And Cate Blanchett just brings her A game to this role. Even when she's playing the character in the Hobbit trilogy, she really does have a lot of care and a lot of affection for this character, so she clearly, brings everything to this role. Mystery, intrigue, and a little bit of darkness, like I said. So she's pretty much narrating the first few minutes of this particular film, and she pretty much establishes that it began with the forging of the Great Rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, the miners and craftsmen at the mountain hall. And 5 were given to the race of, and 9 were given to the race of men, who above all else desired power. Within these rings were bound strength and will to govern each race. But were all of them deceived when another ring was made? And in the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret a Master Ring, to control all others. And into this ring he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. One ring to rule them all. One by one, thousands of men, women and children fell to the power of the ring. But there were some who resisted, and a last alliance of men and elves marched against the armies of Mordor, and on the slopes of Mount Doom they fought for the freedom of Middle-earth. And then from there is the most epic battle sequence that is the showcase for great special effects, but it's also a wonderful moment because we get to feel this sense of spectacle, we get to feel this sense of actual fear, as not only are we seeing goblins and orcs just fall off of cliffs as arrow fire is basically being directed to them, but we also see a army en masse. We see a massive volcano which is meant to be on the slopes of Mount Doom, and we see friggin' terrifying orcs. And when I saw this at the cinema when I was 10 years old, and I couldn't believe it. I was literally sitting in my cinema seat, just absolutely, my eyes were, wow. It was such a good experience. To see this film in the cinema is awesome. I absolutely love it. Whenever I get the chance to see a re-release of these films, I'd love to go and see them on the big screen again and just get those chills whenever I see that opening shot. Because whenever I see it at home on DVD or on Netflix, I always just feel like, yeah, it's good, but to see it on the big screen, wow, in this day and age, yes, sir. Because honestly, that was amazing when I was a kid, and I honestly found it to be so incredibly wonderful. This particular opening does a very good job of showing how intimidating Sauron is and how intimidating his power is. So we see that right off the bat. But not only this, but when we get to the several years later, when it's established that Isildur, son of the king, took up his father's sword and cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and instead of destroying the ring, he ends up, keeping it, and this leads inevitably to his death. This pretty much sets up a underlining thing for the majority of this particular franchise. Not only does it establish that it basically is a plot point that kind of, is very important. It establishes two main things, which is it establishes the blade that was broken in half during the Battle of the One Ring. But we also get to hear that it's because of Isildur that this happened. But not only that, but it was Isildur whose descendant comes later on in the film. But the whole entire thing is basically a call to a myth, essentially. When Boromir, at the very halfway through the film, looks at the broken blade and pretty much says, the blade that cut the ring from Sauron's hand, and he basically traces it through the finger and touches the point, and it basically cuts his finger. That is pretty much a great scene because it establishes that all these stories have a network of a mythology almost. It really sets it up beautifully well. And the introduction that Cate Blanchett did in voiceover, she pretty much says that this entire world has a history and a deeper mythology that we don't even get the chance to see. But if you've read the books, you know exactly what they're talking about. You know about Bilbo's adventure, and you know about all these other things that go on. You know about the creature Gollum and his temptation with the ring. You know about Morgoth in the Silmarillion. You know about all these other characters and all these other storylines. And it really is such a great example of Peter Jackson really fine-tuning the details to a degree where it feels like there's a deep mythology here, and it actually extends to the opening scene in Hobbiton in the Shire, where Frodo meets Gandalf the Wizard, one of my favourite characters in the history of fiction, and because he's a wizard, and I have a huge love for wizards and witches in media and in stories. So if I were to have an avatar, I'd have him wear a wizard's cloak and a hat and a staff, and I go around causing all sorts of trouble, setting all kinds of rights wrong, and, just having a lot of fun along the way. So, yeah, I love me a wizard, and Gandalf the Grey says a wonderful phrase when Frodo says, "You're late." And he goes, "A wizard is never late, my dear Frodo, nor is he early, for he arrives precisely when he means to." And that I just love. They're neither late nor early, but they arrive exactly when they mean to. The point is that we're here. It doesn't matter how we got here or what time we were meant to be here. We're here, okay? So if you ever have someone saying you're late to a party or to a special get-together where you're of importance, just say, "I am never late. I'm always arriving precisely when I mean to." Remember that whenever you're late to somewhere. And tell them that Josh of Whimsical and Interesting Musings sent you. Or told you to say that. So, yeah, this is a great opening sequence because it establishes the world of Hobbiton in such a beautiful way. Howard Shore's music is absolutely spectacular in this film, whether he's scoring epic battle sequences or he's scoring the town of Hobbiton and giving it character. He always gives his musical scores character, and you really do feel it in this film. You feel the scale, you feel the atmosphere, you feel the power of these particular scenes taking place. And excuse me. What really is interesting is throughout this entire conversation, we hear of Bilbo, who, when you watch the opening title sequence, it shows you the scene where he finds the One Ring in the cave during the Riddles in the Dark chapter, where Gollum and Bilbo decide to play a game of riddles after he basically steals, or he takes, not knowing that it's Gollum's, until it's too late when he actually discovers that, oh, I actually have something of his that he wants, which he calls his precious. And Bilbo is very strangely not aging. He hasn't aged a day when Gandalf sees him, and they have this wonderful scene, which is probably one of my favourites in the entire trilogy, where Gandalf knocks on Bilbo's door, and Bilbo goes, "No, thank you. We don't want any well wishers or distant relations." And then Gandalf goes, "And what about very old friends?" And when he opens the door, and you hear it in Ian Holmes' Bilbo's voice, where he just basically has this look of, I can't believe it's you. I can't believe you've come back after all this time. And you really feel the friendship. And it doesn't say, oh, we've been friends for years. Because a lot of screenwriters and a lot of writers in general would just say, oh, come on, you've known me for years. Like, how long have we gone? How long do we go back? We go back a long way, right? Like, every screenwriter, every storyteller always feels like they need to have that moment where the characters basically say, "Oh, you've known me for years. Like, how long have we known each other? We've known each other for a long time. We go back a long way, don't we?" Especially in stuff like Goodfellas and The Godfather. Although it does give flavour in those films to what type of people they are in those instances. Whereas in the case of Lord of the Rings, they do something very clever, which is they show you through the characters' performances how long these characters have known each other. And they do kind of say it as a throwaway line that all your long years we've been friends, and haven't we? Trust me, as you once did. But it shows you that Gandalf has the best of intentions for Bilbo in that scene. When he says that, it doesn't feel like, oh, we're just basically throwing exposition at you. It's him basically saying, trust me, as you once did. And he trusted him enough to go on that adventure many years ago in The Hobbit, so why can't he trust him now? And I think that really is a great moment, because it shows you what Gandalf's willing to do for his friend, essentially. And it's beautifully done. So when they have that scene where he opens the door and Ian Holmes as Bilbo sees him, you feel the weight of that friendship. You feel like they're friends that haven't seen each other for years, and they're now just starting to reunite. And that's the beauty of this film. They're able to kind of just give you these little connections. And there is even one where, if you're not paying attention in this film, you're kind of thinking, who the hell is this guy in the next movie? With Michael Vanya, who is essentially a elven guard of Mirkwood Forest, or what it used to be called before it was called Mirkwood, before it was overrun by spiders. And he basically has a big role to play in the Battle of Helm's Deep in the Two Towers. But he really does have a moment with Aragorn in Fellowship of the Ring, and you really do feel like they actually have grown a bond over that period. And of course, it's even better explained and even further given development in the books. But because it's a film and it's not a television series, they can't, go even further into these details. But what Peter Jackson and his wife Fran Walsh and their co-screenwriter Philippa Boyne, who's since become a part of the Jackson family in terms of filmmaking, did a really incredible job with this film, because they were able to really pay homage and really kind of, add scenes that might not always be great for the film for pacing, but they always manage to know when it's necessary to cut this thing for pacing and when to do this other thing for the sake of the runtime. But what's really interesting is all these scenes in Hobbiton do a very good job of myth making, building the world building, essentially is what we call it in the writer's game. And they do a very good job of kind of establishing who Bilbo is, not just through dialogue, but through visual storytelling as well, because there's a lot of scenes in the opening sections in Hobbiton where you are seeing images and various references to the book, various visual cues to The Hobbit story. And first of all is when Frodo and Gandalf are talking in the passing through the Shire and seeing all the people, and they're talking about his old adventure, and he goes, "Oh, if you're referring to the incident with the dragon, I was barely involved. All I did was give your uncle a nudge out of the door." And Frodo just simply says, "Whatever you did, you've been officially labelled a disturber of the peace." He's like, "All right." I love his reaction in that scene. Oh yes. But I love it. I love Gandalf. He's amazing. He's awesome. So yeah, and he's played by the wonderful Ian McKellen, who's fantastic. He's a wonderful Shakespearean actor, and he still is being awesome in all these other films that he's in. But I will always know him as Gandalf the Grey, and he's absolutely wonderful. But moving on with the plot, during Bilbo's 111th birthday, he gets a little bit self-conscious and he decides to elope in the middle of the night during his birthday celebration by putting the ring on. And Gandalf immediately knows what's up. He knows that, Bilbo's up to something, because Bilbo's a little bit more mischievous than he was at the beginning of The Hobbit. He's a little bit more, willing to do crazy things, whereas in The Hobbit, the beginning of The Hobbit, he's very uptight. He's very keen on where his furniture is and not to mess around with his doilies and things like that. And he very much likes to keep things nice and tidy, whereas he's a little bit more chaotic this time around. Maybe it's because he's getting older and he kind of feels like, oh, I'm almost to the grave, so I might as well have some fun while I'm here. Yeah, but yeah, it's one of those things that really kind of... It's a great scene because it shows you what... First of all, this scene is brilliant because it shows you that not only is Bilbo... If you've read the books when this film came out, when you've read the book, The Hobbit, you know that he's kind of, a little bit, more carefree, whereas in the beginning of The Hobbit, he's a little bit more careful, and he kind of, he's a little bit more uptight than he was. Like, he loves his gardening, and he loves his books, and things like that, and then he gets called, the literal call to adventure through his 13 dwarves, and then, of course, he gets taken on this wonderful adventure that we know of because of this film. And what's really wonderful about this scene is it kind of shows you how powerful the ring is and how the soul of Sauron is in this thing. It's literally like a Horcrux. And if you're a Harry Potter fan, you know that reference. But yes, it's like a Horcrux where a part of a person's soul is literally in an object. And it's done through dark magic, which isn't specified in that particular book series, but there is further details to say that this is how it happens. And it takes place through the act of murder, basically. But Sauron is quite powerful, so he must have killed a ton of followers in order to gain his magical prestige. But he's manipulating Bilbo to keep the ring, and he's starting to turn into Gollum. He even refers to the ring as his precious at one point. And Gandalf picks up on this, and he immediately flies into a rage, and he just basically... He says, "You want this all for yourself, you don't care about me, you're greedy." And Gandalf basically just says, "Fuck that noise," and I'm not he says in his very booming voice, and the room goes dark, that, "I'm not trying to rob you, I'm trying to help you." And it's just such a beautiful scene. The character moments in this film, oh, it's so lovely. I love those scenes between Bilbo and Gandalf, because you really do see their friendship throughout all of this, encapsulated in all these scenes, and it's just so wonderfully done. So Bilbo decides to leave after a very emotional goodbye, and he even makes a reference to The Hobbit, which he calls There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale, which of course we all know was the working title for The Hobbit when J.R. Tolkien was originally writing this book. And that entire scene was just beautiful, and I love the scenes between two. Whenever Bilbo's on screen, I always get very, very emotional. Like, I really just love seeing this portrayal done by Ian Holmes. And I love Martin Freeman, but I don't think... He was good as Bilbo, and I think he's one of the crown jewels of the Hobbit trilogy, I think, him being cast as a younger Bilbo. But I just get a very special, warm and fuzzy feeling whenever I see, Ian Holmes as Bilbo in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He kind of feels like your grandparent, kind of. Like, whenever you see him, you just kind of get all nice and warm and toasty inside. And yeah, that's kind of that feeling for me whenever I see, this fictional movie character. But yeah, it's really nice whenever you don't see him. You kind of feel like there's a bit of an absence there. But Bilbo, Frodo is now tasked with taking in the One Ring, and Gandalf goes off to Gondor to research the ring, and we only see it for about a few days, probably in the film, but in the book it's a whole year or a whole 10 years, I think, or a whole 5 years. Like, it's a really long time in the book. Like, he goes away for ages. So when Frodo just sees Gandalf in Hobbiton one day, he is completely actually happy to see him because he hasn't seen him for years. And Gandalf then explains to him the ring, and Sam eavesdrops, and they just go on their own adventure for a while, and they are being pursued by a gang of riders, ring wraiths, who are the old kings of men, and they were corrupted by the ring, and they are basically in the visage of the Dark Lord. They meet Merry and Pippin, and together they narrowly avoid the wrath of one of the ring wraiths, and they make it to the Prancing Pony, where they meet Strider, a ranger in the wilds, who decides to help them because he knows what trinket he has. And at first they think he's an agent of the enemy, but very soon it starts to get apparent that he actually really cares about these guys, and he really does, really does want to see them safely to their destination. They were originally going to wait for Gandalf, but Gandalf was delayed through seeking counsel with his superior, Saruman the White, who is, if you don't know the mythology of the Silmarillion, you will basically know what the wizards are. You could just say that they're just wizards, like Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo and all the rest of it, and Expelliarmus and Avada Kedavra and all the other things. But these guys aren't just wizards in Middle Earth. They are a higher being, along the same lines as Galadriel or Sauron, in the sense that they are a member of a group of spirits called the Astari, and the Astari are basically the guiders and the all-seeing, all-knowing, to a point, beings. They're kind of like a grade below what Galadriel and Sauron is, where I've forgotten the names of what the Galadriel and the Sauron actually are, but they are a type of elvish or elven people that are way older than the likes of Elrond and the rest of it. Like, they're much more high beings. But Gandalf and Saruman and Radagast the Brown, if you know the films, and two other wizards who are in purple and blue, cloaks. There's actually a beautiful illustration of all five of these wizards, and it's beautifully captured, and they're called the Astari, which are basically beings who, if they die and they haven't gotten their duties met, or if they're corrupted, if they haven't got their duties met, they will basically be reincarnated back into their old bodies, and they will change colours. Hence why in the Ralph Bakshi version of Lord of the Rings, Saruman refers to his coat of many colours, referring to the fact that he basically has been, he's lived many lives and he's done many deeds, and including corruption. He's now officially the coat of many colours because now he's pretty much gone rogue and gone dark. But yeah, that's an interesting tidbit. The animated version of Lord of the Rings was directed by the same guy who directed Fritz the Cat. And that I thought was very weird, but it's actually really fitting, if you really think about it, that a guy who's known for adult animation would do a more adult animated film or an adult fantasy film like Lord of the Rings, or the cartoon version at least. And it's actually a pretty decent film. It's not as good as the original trilogy, of course, because they adapt 2 books, whereas the entire trilogy literally adapts 3. But it's still a decent film. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. There were some things that I could have done without, but it's still a good film. I'll do my own separate whimsical and interesting musings review of that film. If you want to, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to talk about it. And I really do think this is where the film really kind of kicks into high gear because Strider takes them to Riverdale. Riverdale. Rivendell. Sorry, I've been watching too much Riverdale. I've got the two mixed up. Rivendell's where Rivendell's where Archie lives. Where does the elves live? Oh, they live in Riverdale. No, only joking. They live in Rivendell, and this is where the plot actually gets moving because they actually have to take. Bilbo doesn't have to just bring the ring to Rivendell and keep it. I can't speak. He doesn't just actually put it in the hands of Elrond and keep it there for the elves to protect, and later someone else will go to the fires of Mount Doom and destroy it. He has to literally take it, and he doesn't take it willingly at first, because a lot of people are arguing. He just thinks, I will take it to Mordor. I'll save all your bickering, all your elf and dwarf, gibberish and hatred for each other, and I'm going to take it myself to the fires of Mount Doom. And they begin this great quest, which starts off in Moria, the mines of Moria, in which a dark and insidious evil lurks there, one of which that Gandalf is really frightened to meet, because it means his death, essentially. And it's actually a really emotional moment when they go into the halls of the great dwarven cities, and you see all the columns and the music swells. Howard Shore's music is just fantastic. It's one of the more iconic things about this film series. But if you are familiar with my Talk of David Cronenberg video, you will know that Howard Shore also did the music for that particular series of films, and both him and David Cronenberg are still working together, thank goodness, because he's a wonderful composer. But his work on this is really fantastic, and everything in his repertoire in this particular, just this film alone, he creates iconography with his sounds, and I absolutely love the music for this version, and it really does bring a lump to your throat seeing that imagery of the halls, like the darkened hallways and the large columns, and you're seeing this very wide hallway of all these different corridors and all these different subsections of the hallway, and it's very vast. You just sit and you feel the scale, coupled with the staff of the light from Gandalf's staff. You really do see everything. So they get sidetracked into this little room when Gimli sees a light, which is basically a white light. This is symbolic of a shrine in one of the rooms, and he sees his cousin Barlim, who was a member of the party of the 13 dwarves in the Hobbit trilogy, or the Hobbit story, not necessarily the films because they're their own video. And I have a lot to say about that one too. I really do think this is where I actually find it really interesting, because this is where the real, excuse my language, the real shit hits the fan. And it's all because Pippin decided to get fiddly with a particular rotting corpse. Not fiddly as in a dirty way, but he actually touches one of the corpses. Why would you touch something that doesn't look clean anyway? Like, it's a corpse, Pippin, it's nothing else. But yeah, he touches his corpse and its head falls down a well shaft, and it creates this entire cacophony of noise, which is goblin yells and a couple of other things, including They Have a Cave Troll, done by the great Sean Bean as Boromir, and they decide to board up the room, and they decide to take to fighting. And this is a fantastic sequence in its own right, but it's also very kind of, again, every set piece, whenever it's action based, they always pull out all the stops, and it really is well done because everyone brings their A game, including Frodo, who is mostly known, even in the scene where he's fighting the ring wraiths, he just drops the sword and cowers down. So when Frodo actually gets the chance to actually take up his sword, take up Sting, which is from his Uncle Bilbo, which his Uncle Bilbo gives to him in a scene which actually frightened me the first time round. Like, seeing Bilbo go from this kind elderly man, this little elderly hobbit man, to an absolute beast, like someone who's possessed in 5 seconds, in the period of 5 seconds, that's actually really traumatic. But it is actually a very sad sequence, because you see how even when he's parted with the ring and he's well again, he still has that kind of, he still has the residue of its power on him as he's looking at the ring and as he's being influenced by. And it's such a sad moment, because he genuinely feels guilt then. I'm sorry I brought this upon you, Frodo. I'm sorry for everything. And it really is sad, because you really do feel and even in the Hobbit trilogy, they really could have bring this home. And he doesn't know it at the time, but he feels like there's something here that I shouldn't be attached to, but I am. And I love that, and I love that carried through to Martin Freeman's performance in that trilogy. And that's all I'm really going to say on that for now. But that will be its own video, so look forward to that. But I do think this was a fantastic showcase for all these things. I love the scene where Gandalf fights the Balrog. It was a scene which I had very specific memories of in the cinema. I cried when Gandalf fell into the pit. I literally cried out loud. Like, you could hear me crying in the cinema. And I think it was about 10 or 8 or 10 years old. So I remember I cried in the cinema. And as the music filtered, my mum and dad were literally going, shh, it's okay, shh. And my dad actually literally held me and he said, Gandalf's not dead, he's fine. And I thought, oh, but it's still sad though. But even then, and then my uncle Jeff came round, and he was a fan of the Tolkien verse, and he said, Gandalf doesn't die, Josh, it's okay. And I literally, but I couldn't help but cry at the time, because I didn't know that. I didn't read the books. I was just watching it through these films, and I remember it made me cry so hard, and my mum and dad were trying to get me to shush, and my dad literally held me, and he whispered in my ear, Gandalf's fine, he's okay. And I remember it so vividly, and it's such a great moment, because I literally had that feel. I had that same look. I had that same moment where I just wanted to shout, no! But yeah, I love Gandalf. He's just such a great character. So to see him, for all I knew, then die, it just felt like a tremendous kick in the balls. And it really was an emotional movie, and it really did, because this fantasy film is dark. A lot of people say, oh, Game of Thrones is better because it's got sex, it's got, it's got sex, it's got blood, it's got guts, it's got everything like that, it's got people swearing, it's really gritty and really ucha. But to me, I think Lord of the Rings steals the mantle every single time. Maybe it's because of the nostalgia, because that was the first dark fantasy series I had watched, besides because Harry Potter was coming around on the same time, the first two Harry Potter films. I kind of considered Lord of the Rings to be the darkest, because it really did kind of go to a lot of dark places. I mean, you literally saw the birth of evil in the Uruk-hais, where they just come out of the earth and they're in little bits of the rock where it's just sort of rotted and decayed and it's moulding, and they just get them out of these little sacks, and they've got these horrible beasts that growl and, make this kind of rattling sound when they, grit their teeth and they snarl. And it's like when you have a chest infection almost, like it's that sort of crackling sound. And it really is disturbing. So I really kind of found myself thinking, this is really freaky. Like, this is a really dark series. But it's also a series about, as dark as the series gets, it manages to hold on to this theme of hope, that hope will come. And it's a fantastic end, because it also made me upset and made me think, it made me think, do I actually really want to continue the series? Because a lot of people die. And it really made me sad, because Boromir died, and he died kind of being the worst person he could be. I mean, he was tempted by the ring by Frodo. He has a row with Aragorn in the director's cut, in the extended edition of the Fellowship of the Ring. So he kind of dies knowing that, his brother's going to be on his own, and his father is still going to be a douchebag. So that's actually really horrible. So he leaves his father knowing that he's got to do this mission, but his father isn't interested in helping the cause or trying to stop Sauron. He wants power, and he wants to, he wants his son, his beloved son, who's the great warrior, to, go and attend this council. And it's awful because we know where it goes. But I thought to myself when I was a kid in the cinema, like, I don't really want to watch this film anymore. It's really sad. Like, everyone dies in it, and everyone's going away, and it's really sad. And I remember that feeling, and it's so embarrassing that I'm opening up to it now, but I really do love the series for that reason, because it really had a good start. And again, it follows the same beats as Game of Thrones of Series 1, where everything feels happy in the beginning, but then as soon as that plot point happens, and as soon as this stuff gets out of hand, and Bran gets pushed out that window, you immediately get involved in darker territory, and you're immediately, in this very disturbing place. It follows the same beats as Lord of the Rings. In fact, that first episode in the first few seasons of the show, where it's sort of very kind of, it starts to build, and that twist, we know it was going to happen because the guy was played by Sean Bean as well, so we knew it was going to happen, that something was going to happen to Sean Bean, but I was kind of hoping that he wouldn't this time round, that he'd at least survive a few more seasons, but no, this character dies too, and he's also played by Sean Bean. Poor Sean Bean, he always dies in things, even good things, but it really kind of makes you think, this film's actually really sad, but it really kind of builds to the next two films. But this first outing is pretty good. I have a lot of very strong memories of it, and I really do like the fact that all these little details, when you watch on repeat viewings, it really is equally more rewarding, because you get to see more development of other characters who only just have a few scenes, like 2 scenes. Arwen has, who's the love interest of Aragorn, played by Liv Tyler, and she basically only has 2 scenes in the entire film, just 2 scenes, but she really leaves an impact on the story going forward in some of the subplots with Aragorn and things like that. She really leaves an impression, because she is obviously his love interest, but you really do feel like she has a much more bigger role to play in this one, whereas in the book she doesn't have any role, and literally Aragorn sends Frodo off to the mercy of the riders on his own. Like, he's literally on the horse in the book, literally on his own, on a horse. He's literally clinging to consciousness, and he basically gets out his sword and he says, "By the wrath of my people and the Shire, you will not have the ring nor me," and things like that. And he literally, shows his resilience. And I love Bilbo in the books, and I love Bilbo in the Ralph Bakshi version, because he doesn't just sit there clinging to consciousness. That's one of the things that I will say. Frodo isn't that strong in this movie, because he only has one scene where he gets to be a bit of a badass, which is him fighting in the mines, the Barlim's tomb in the mines of Moria, but that's the only one. Whereas in the book, he actually, as he's clinging to consciousness, he makes a speech to the ring wraiths, and he's like, "Oh, you should either have the ring nor me," and things like that. And then the wave thing happens, and he gets, the ring wraiths bugger off, and it's really fantastic. I love it. But yeah, there's things in the books that I actually think, oh, they should have kept that in. But then there's other things, like the Tom Bombadil stuff, which I can see why they cut it out, because it really didn't have any... It just basically was relaying a lot of the information that we already knew, and it just kind of felt like padding. And I know people are going to hate me if I say that. Book lovers were probably going to hate me with the Tom Bombadil stuff, but it didn't really add anything to the story. And again, that's the thing that I think is the big problem with the book, is the book kind of is one... It's a great book, but I kept thinking to myself, J.R. Tolkien has a specific style where he would spend pages and pages and pages describing one detail that you just see in passing. The character would just see in passing, like a field of flowers. He would literally go on for paragraphs describing the origin of that flower, the colour of that flower, where that flower came from and its lineage. I'm not even joking. He would literally do that. And it kind of... I'm all struck by the language, but I kept thinking to myself, this is a beautiful sentence, but do I actually where am I in the story right now? Because I've just completely gone on a tangent with this entire thing. And that's one of the things that I will say about the book is it's kind of not the type of book if you like fast reads, because honestly, it's one of those books where if you're the type of person who likes to sit down and absorb every detail and really appreciate the scope and the craftsmanship of the writing and everything like that, and the world building and the little minutiae of writing, this book's for you. And I definitely, wanted to give it a read, but I think that I could have thought to myself, I kind of don't want to. It was only after I, went to college that I actually, sat down and actually picked up the copy and actually read it one night when I was in the library at college, that I actually kind of got through it and actually really appreciated the book for what it was. And I really kind of liked it for that slow paced feel. And I read it in installments while I was in the LRC during my breaks. And it was when I was doing it in installments and I actually persevered through it and actually read the story and appreciated what it was, that I actually really kind of appreciated the book overall. This is getting over to 40 minutes and I don't really want my videos to get overly long, but I will say it's a 5-star out of 5 film for me. It's an absolutely incredible film. That's Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, and I will review more of this particular trilogy, and I'll even go into Game of Thrones. I went into a bit with the pilot on this one, but yeah, I will have more reviews very soon. Take care and see you later. This has been Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and I'm your host, Josh.